he's speaking about a text that we've heard about. Anybody who's studied Jewish learning, anybody who's heard a lecture or anything like that, has encountered Midrash, or we call it Midrash either way, but it's hard to know sometimes where to place it. And since Rabbi Yoni Mozeson has been studying for 7 years, immersed himself, so he's going to nicely share some things with us. Hopefully we have questions. I'm sure we do. And just to, I guess, review, which together with his wife, who made Aliyah from New Jersey. When was it?
10 years is a good round number.
1 decade ago, which is a tenth of a century, which is okay. And he came, and he is a Musmach, which means he has smicha from Yeshiva University, correct?
Right.
And worked for many years and still does maintain an involvement in marketing, but he worked in advertising, making TV commercials. So I'll ask you before you go into your class, what is a commercial that now some of us are not American, but pick a commercial that we might have seen that you actually, let's say, wrote. I'm sure there's a group effort, but something that you really, that's your script, that's your storyline.
Well, I worked on Crest Toothpaste, American Express, Hardee's, Huggies. I mean, I worked at the largest office of the largest ad agency in the world in Ogilvy, New York. So there was no small accounts. Everything you do is, you can't hide. So I'm sure you saw a lot of them. Yeah.
Okay, so tonight's class, every class, and the whole effort here, A Cup of Torah, is a merit for the Refuah Shlema, the healing of Jackie Petensky, Yakova, Ariella Bas Fruma.
I just wanted to give a disclaimer that this is not an academic lecture. In other words, my interest in Midrash is sort of a love affair. Anytime you learn Torah, it's like, there's a theory of, I worked a lot in biotech, and every organ in the body has a different time that all the cells are replaced based on what you eat. So you literally you are what you eat. And the same is true with learning Torah. Any Torah that you learn becomes part of your neshama, becomes part of your brain waves, and it changes you. And that's really my, relationship with Midrash. So again, it's not academic. People have asked me, when was Midrash Rabbah and Midrash Tanchuma? I know that it traces back to Tannaitic times, and I looked up on Google. That's 10 to 220 CE. That's as much as I'm going to go into the academics. I'm really not so interested in academics. I'm interested in more of the spiritual part of this. So what I did actually to prepare, which was wonderful for me, was I actually went over, I actually put together both a written and a video summary every week of what I'm doing. And I went back over all the years, and I wanted to see a pattern. I put that in my teaser video of like 4 buckets that I came up with. I wanted to see what is it about Midrash that's attracting me so much, and how do I categorize it? And before I even go there, I wanted to just read a statement which I think is true of Midrash. And I wrote that Midrash is highly creative, irreverent, brutally honest, and totally unexpected. And maybe for those are the reasons that I love it so much. And the truth is, I would have to admit that's probably a lot of reason why people don't like it. I remember once, I was in a shir, and a Rebbe said to me, I don't like Midrash because I don't have all the maforshim to fall back on. So sometimes I don't like to be flying without wings. I like to know that I could always find Rishon Nachronim and get all the answers. I don't want to and to me, I said, Midrash is just the opposite. That's why I love it, because you're flying without a seatbelt. Sometimes the maforshim don't actually deal with a tough issue, and you have to figure it out. And it's hard, and you come up with theories, and then you reject them, and you keep coming up with theories until it sounds right and it seems right. Now, I'm very lucky to be in a kollel where I have very learned guys who I bounce stuff off, so I'm not talking in a vacuum. In any case, back to my irreverent, brutally honest, totally unexpected. I would like to give you some examples of that. We talked about the para aduma. So the Midrash says something which is really amazing. The Midrash says, you have a problem with the para aduma. You have problem understanding something tahor coming from something tameh. Somebody's tameh and all of a sudden becomes tahor. And everybody says, oh, it's such a conundrum. Even Shlomo couldn't figure it out. He says, what's the big deal? Look at Jewish history. I'll read it to you in Hebrew. It says, Avram mitarach. Look at that. There's a tahor coming from tameh. Avram came from a idle salesman. Cash and carry, We sold idols. Chizkiyahu came from Achaz. Yoshiyahu came from Ammon. Mordechai came from Shimi. The Jewish people came from the nations of the world. And the big kicker, this world is actually going to emerge. The next world is going to emerge from this world. So look at all those things. If you can figure those things out, surely all of a sudden the idea of, the paraduma, it becomes insignificant. There's such bigger things that you can ponder that you can put very creatively. The marriage is always very creative and innovative, putting it into the category of tahor coming from tameh, really recasting it in a very creative way. I'll give you another example. The Midrash says in Mishpatim that if there's one principle in the world that could change the whole world. If people were willing to accept rebuke from one another, the whole world would be full of serenity, goodness, and blessing. Can you imagine? That's what the Midrash says. You want me to sum up all of human nature? People get insulted. People can't just look at a message and say, wow, what can I take from that? How can I grow from that? I thought it was an amazing thing. Another example in Shemot, the Midrash says with the burning bush that there were two things that got Moshe the job. Number one, he knew that God was in pain. That's what he sensed from looking at from the burning bush. And number two, that not only was God feeling the pain of the Jewish people, God himself was in pain. And that kind of level of understanding and perception is what Moshe had, which made him a leader of the Jewish people. It's a beautiful, very beautiful way of looking at Moshe and understanding the burning bush. Another example, this is from Vayigash, and again, I'm going back to my irreverent. So in Vayigash, you have this confrontation, Yosef and Yehuda, and the Midrash takes it into this wild place where they were throwing at each other the most unbelievable statements. For example, Yehuda said to Yosef, right, not knowing who he is, he said, "Oh, I know why you were so interested in my brother Joseph. He's very handsome, and I know your Paro is a little bit of a pervert, so you probably wanted to, you probably were happy to get a handsome guy like that." And then Yosef, who according to the Midrash actually knew what was going on but pretended not to, he held up his cup and he said to Yehuda, "Why are you talking I understand you're just one of the brothers. What gives you the right to be talking to me?" And he said, "What do you mean? I'm the guarantor of my brother." He says, "You're the guarantor, your brother? I looked at my magic cup and I see that you sold him to the Midianites for 20 pieces of silver. What kind of guarantor are you?" So this is not in the pshat, right? These hurling these insults at each other. But to me, it's really showing the tension. And in fact, there are many people who trace this tension between Yehuda and Yosef throughout Jewish history as an issue that needs to be, perhaps in Messianic times, to be resolved, because there's a tension there. There were two leaders, and here they were confronting each other. Who's Yosef by circumstance is the one who is in charge now, but Yehuda, by the power of his character, the fact that he took responsibility with Tamar, he emerged, even though he wasn't the oldest one. He had no right to be the leader, but he emerged as a leader. And now they're confronting each other. And that, it's another thing I'm going to touch on later, is Midrash the pshat? You could say, wow, this doesn't sound like pshat, but in some way it is the pshat, because the Midrash is bringing out this confrontation that you have to understand. It's not in the psukim so easy. It's not easy to find it. Another irreverent one, again, Mechiras Yosef. So the Midrash says that the brothers got together, 10 brothers got together in order to make a pact, they make a t'nai, that nobody would tell Yaakov what happened. They took an oath. The only problem is there were only 9 there. Reuven wasn't around. They needed a 10th guy. God said, "I'll be the 10th guy. I'll sign on that pact not to tell Yaakov what happened." Whoa, what do you do? How do you deal with that? God is pushing along Jewish history and Jewish destiny. In fact, we're going to talk about that later, about what role God might have had in the sale of Yosef. So let me just give you one more example. Again, This is in, when Avram was talking about, saving Sodom. So in the Midrash, Avram actually has the chutzpah to say to God, I think you're exhibiting a human weakness. You're losing your temper. You want to destroy the city. I mean, can't you control your anger? So it's a very funny thing. And Avram says, are you doing Chilul Hashem here? Do you realize what you're doing? You're killing people, So the Midrash sort of pokes you in the eye and makes you think about stuff that you wouldn't normally think about. And
which brings us to a question.
Great.
Many questions, right? So here's my question of the moment.
Great.
Other people have questions can certainly open up their mics and ask the question. Just wait till I finish the sentence. Just kidding. But no. So the Midrash, you didn't get into the academics, but it's early. Midrash is early. It's
right.
The canonization of Tanakh took place in, 500-600 before the Common Era. What was decided to be the holy books, and then Midrash. I just looked it up quickly. You also quoted a date as late as maybe 400 before the Common Era, and as early as 1200. This is before the Talmud. This is
Tanaitic, right?
It's before that even. It's
10 to 220 CE. The Tanaim.
Oh, the Tanaim.
Right.
Okay, so this is earlier. So if we have the text, and the Midrash was composed, not all recorded actual conversations, but it was composed by the rabbis. What was its purpose? Why was it coming? It was coming to be an explanation, to edify and to augment and to provoke people to think about the text and to give real life situations of the day, whereas the text may not be able to subsume or whatever the word is.
Right. Okay.
What is
it? Great question. So again, you have to understand, this is Torah Shebaal Peh, right? This came from Sinai. When it was recorded and written down is academic, but this is Torah Sinai. So this came down originally. So the question you're asking is, so what's the purpose?
From Sinai, I wasn't aware.
Yeah. No, this is Torah Sinai. It's just like the Gemara. It's like the Mishnah. It's all came and it was recorded later, but it's all Torah Sinai. So the question is, so what purpose is it? So again, I don't know if you've had this experience, like when I had my own ad agency, my partner was Roman Catholic. He was told by his priest, don't study the Bible because that's what you come to church for. I'll tell you what you have to know. So that he had very, very sketchy understanding of even the basic stories in the Bible. But for us, even people who study the Chumash, I find that you can't understand it. It is a closed book. And right, I'm sure you know that famous metaphor where they talk about the two keys that, there's a Torah Shebaal Peh, there's Torah B'Sav. In other words, the Christians who think they understand the Torah don't have a clue because first of all, they're reading a translation of a translation of a translation. But the words don't make any sense. The stories don't make any sense. You don't have the background. You don't understand emotionally what's going on. You don't understand psychologically what's going on. You don't even understand theologically what's going on. And that's what the Midrash is giving you. It's filling in a beautiful picture so you understand what's going on. And I hope, maybe keep this question in mind. I hope as we keep going that this, more and more examples of this, because it really is a very, very important and basic question of what it's about. But when you get into it, you wonder, how could you, like Bereshis, it took me a year to do Parsha Bereshis in Midrash Rabbah, so and try to understand the snake in this and the conversations. What chance did Adam have against this snake? The snake was far craftier than Adam and Chava. They didn't have a chance. What was going on here? So the Christians have an answer, original sin, blah, blah, blah. But you have to understand what's going on and what's the purpose. And you can't understand anything really, I think, without the Midrash. You can't move. So, the great question. Any other questions before I keep going? Okay. So, now I wanted to get to those, those buckets that I promised you. The first bucket that I came up with was, I'm calling it Emunah. I personally found that my belief in God gained exponentially from learning Midrash, basically because, as I said before, this is finding God's hiding places. The Midrash is pulling back the curtain. The Midrash is assuring you that God runs the world. And you don't have to worry. Everything has a reason. There's a purpose. You're supposed to grow from things. You're supposed to, it's very complex. God could be, doing many, many different things at the same time while one person is growing, one person is punished, and but it's all for a reason. So again, the number one thing the bucket, so I sort of created was Emunah. And I want to give you some examples, and some of these we'll get back to the teaser things that I had put out there. Why did Yitzchak want to curse Yaakov? Why did Boaz want to curse Ruth? So what the Midrash is basically saying is that any junctures in Jewish destiny, God takes away our free will. When Yitzchak discovered that he was fooled by Yaakov, and Esav came for his bracha, and he found out that he fooled him, he was going to curse him. As maybe you can understand that any father might be angry that he was just taken for a ride. And God just stopped those words and did not allow him to do it, and made him say, Gam Baruch Tiyeh. And the same thing with Boaz and Ruth. Boaz is the most, respectable Gadol Ador. He looks around and he sees a young woman, pretty young lady, lying there next to him. What are you trying to do? Ruin my reputation? It was a terrible thing. He was outraged. He wanted to curse Ruth, according to the Midrash, but Hashem, again, made him bless her. Because, again, as I was saying, that God does not allow Jewish history to unfold, especially at critical times, especially at times that have to do with destiny, especially if it has to do with the destiny of the Jewish people. God is completely controlled. Okay, so the next thing, like for another example in Toldot also, is the Midrash says right out that why was Isaac blind? Why was Yitzchak blind? Because God wanted Rivka and Yaakov to succeed in their plot. And he needed to be blind to get to pull it off. In other words, God, you think, oh my God, why was the poor man blind? Hashem made him blind. He wanted this thing to happen. Now we talk something I mentioned before about the sale of Yosef. The Midrash says again, something, irreverent, but you see how God is controlling. That God made a special love between Yaakov and Yosef, so that the brothers will hate him more, so that when he gets sold into Egypt and Yaakov finds out that he's still alive, he abandons all rational things and says, I'm going, I got to go see him before I die. That was the plan. God wanted to get Yaakov and his family to Egypt. How are you going to get them to Egypt? You could have done it, the Midrash says you could have done it in a way which they could have come in chains or something. God wanted to go in a respectful way, but God was interfering in the free will to make this happen. And so, again, it's funny because it contradicts many other things you read about the terrible sin of, it still is. So you have to understand how both things can happen at the same time. It still is a terrible sin that the brothers sold Yosef. Both are true at the same time. They were tested and they failed their tests and they sold their own brother. Yet it's still true that God wanted this to happen and needed this to happen to get them down to Egypt. And so that's one of the beautiful complexities of the Midrash, trying to say how, things that seem contradictory can be true. Another thing the Midrash says in Kitisa, it says, by the way, Yosef, why Yosef was sold into slavery? He saved the world from starvation. Sometimes we Jews, we get very, into ourselves and we think the whole world revolves around Jews. God cares about the entire planet. There was a huge famine. Millions of people were going to die. Yosef had the answer. He saved the whole planet. He stored away food. You all know the story. So Hashem had to send him down there to save the world. Can you imagine? Yeah, that's also true. That's also what the Midrash says. Another beautiful thing in Miketz, the Midrash says that, again, it says, the Midrash says, God often seems late, but he's always on time. In other words, we all know the story. When Yosef was in prison, he begged the guy who got out, please remember me, get me out of here. And he forgets him, right? He forgot about him completely until 2 years later when, Paro has this disturbing dream and he says, I can't find any, not getting good answers. And then he says, oh, it's Chatai. And he says, I remember, I should have told you there was this guy in prison, this Jew. he got everybody's dream right, and they pulled him out. Now, what if Yosef's request came true? What if as soon as the guy got out of prison, he tried to get Yosef better circumstances? Maybe he got him released from prison, right? Maybe he got him sent to a minimum security prison where you get to play golf and there's no guards around. Who knows what would happen? The whole story wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have become viceroy of Egypt. God waited to this dramatic point when you can go from rags to riches, because God is running the world. And so it seems like, remember we ask these questions so very often. Oh, poor Yosef, he languished in jail for another 2 years. No, you don't get it. God's planned this whole thing. He waited to the right moment, the exact right moment, in order to get what he wanted. And, we're about to learn, I think we're about going to catch up, Matos, I guess America doing the two Sedras together, so we'll be back at the same, so the Midrash says on this week's Parsha that, why did they go to war against Midian? Just to test Ruvain. That they got all the sheep and they decided, I want to have good grazing ground, even though it was like terribly insulting to say to Moshe, hey, I know the whole purpose of you taking us out of Egypt was to come into Israel, but there's some good grazing ground right here. Do you mind if I just stay right here? Terrible chutzpah to do that. And that was a test that they failed. It was a test that how did God make this test? He made this war so that they would get all these livestock just to see what would happen. So again, God is manipulating, I'll give you an example again, maybe you won't like. I had 2 weeks ago, I had COVID. So I was listening to some of these tapes maybe you've heard from Dr. Abramson from Torah, these history tapes. So he was talking about the infighting between the Hasidim and the Snagnim. And it was terrible. They were each reporting on each other to the Russian authorities. It got really, really ugly. And how did it all stop? Because, the Enlightenment started, and Haskalah. And everyone realized, wait a second, we're fighting over what time to say Shema in the morning. These guys are saying, don't say Shema at all, don't daven. We're fighting over the shechita, about the knife, what kind of nicks or this or that. They're saying, eat pig. What's the problem? So they realize, we have to stop fighting. We have a bigger enemy to fight. Did God have any hand in this? I don't know. But you start to see God's fingerprints everywhere when you learn Midrash. Okay, so the next two buckets that are sort of related, I'll put them together, is, and I mentioned this before, there's sort of a psychological backstory, and there's also pshat. In other words, it was really your question, Judah. I mean, how do you even understand things in the Chumash without Midrash? I don't know. And especially the psychological backstory. One of the teaser questions I asked you was, what did Noach have in common with Bill Gates, Henry Ford, and the Wright brothers? Right? So the Midrash says that Noach was the most innovative guy in the generation. He was the Bill Gates, Henry Ford, and Wright brothers of his generation. He taught them how to invent new farming implements so that their life became way easier. They didn't have to worry. They could actually farm and get more produce, and it became a very, very cushy life for them. So now you have to look at the whole story of Noach in a completely different way. It's not like there's some nut job building a boat and people drive by and say, Martha, look at that crazy guy building a boat. No, that was Bill Gates building the boat. Why didn't they talk to him? That was Bill Gates. He just gave $20 billion to his foundation. That's Bill Gates. You can't, he's not an idiot. How come you're not listening to him? He's saying, I'm building a boat because it's going to be a flood. It changes the whole story. So I ask you, could you really understand the story of Noach without knowing that fact? It changes everything. Now we go back, say, to the Bereshit story. When you look at the Bereshit story with the snake, the snake was, who had a chance against the snake? The snake actually said to Adam and Chava, do you know why he doesn't want you to eat from that forbidden fruit? Because you're going to become like a god like him. And God doesn't like competition. People in a certain field don't like other people in the same field. Now that's right in the Chumash. But how do you understand that? How do you understand, did anybody have a chance to fight that kind of, as we call him, a snake oil salesman? I mean, he was, that's what I wrote, was the serpent, the heretic, or just a snake oil salesman? He was amazingly clever, and he had permission. On his paycheck, it said, in God we trust. He was working for God. he was supposed to be testing Chava and Adam to the utmost. And it's such a hard test that the Midrash even goes so far to say, you can't even blame Adam. We blame Adam for the murder of trillions of people, right? He brought mortality to the world. If it wasn't for him, we would all have immortality. Can you imagine having that? And the Midrash says, that's baloney. Look in the Chumash, it says, it talks about Adam ki yomot ba'oel. It was already in the Chumash. The Chumash was the blueprint which God used to create the world. God already knew that there's going to be death in the world. What are you blaming on Adam for? Because what is the Midrash saying? The Midrash is saying he didn't have a chance, maybe. I mean, he did have a chance, but really difficult. It was really difficult. God made it really difficult. And everybody was being tested, and even the serpent was being tested. And what was his downfall? He wasn't supposed to sleep with Chava. That's when he went too far. The Midrash even says that Cain came from the mating of the serpent and Chava, which explains who Cain was, right? But tough stuff. I don't know how you understand Bereshis without the Midrash. Really, really tough stuff. Everybody had these tests. This is something I mentioned actually before we even started about. There's this beautiful idea. You might have heard about this. It's famous Gemara about the oaths, the 3 oaths. When are the Jewish people allowed to come back to Israel? So it says in Torah et ava al techpot, don't arouse love before it's time. So it's a very interesting thing that I think about a lot now that I'm in Israel. It's like, again, when I was watching these history tapes, the Jews, when they were fighting against the Romans, they fought like lions. It was unbelievable. They had to bring so many legions against this little part of the empire they didn't even hardly knew existed. They were ferocious. And then you have thousands of years of Jewish history where we were slaughtered. We never fought back. Unbelievable. These are the same people. And why didn't we come back? Why didn't we go back and fight? We were lions. Why didn't we fight like we were? So, there's this idea that you're not allowed to come back before it's time. And Chazal, I know the Satmar took this very seriously, but I want you to know there's one out. The Midrash of the Gemara says this is true as long as they're not trying to kill you. If they're trying to kill you, all bets are off. The oath is broken. So certainly in the Holocaust, and maybe many will claim before that, all bets are off. You could come back now. And, so this is a beautiful idea that the Midrash brings in Parshat Devarim, talking about, the future and this and that. And I think it's something that people have to think about today. Now we're back again. We're fighting like lions again. What does that mean? What does that signal to the Jewish people who are not living in Israel? That we were the lions, we became, the sheep, and now we're the lions again. Is God saying it's time to come back? Is God saying, I said, don't arouse love before it's time? Maybe the love has been aroused. I don't know. You have to think about it. I don't like to preach to anybody. My own story of Aliyah was, I always tell people on a scale of 0 to 10, I was -4. I was director of marketing of a biotech during the big economic downturn of, about 11, 12 years ago. And I was out of work. I was 55. I was sucking money out of the bank. And I came to Israel for some other reason. And someone said, hey, can I send your resume to this high-tech place? I said, resume? I send 25 resumes a day. I don't get a single answer. I even send resume to places I worked at who have vetted me already. They still don't answer me. You want to send my resume? Go ahead, send my resume. So this guy calls me up and he says, can you come and see me? So I said, fine, on the way to the airport, I'll come and see you. He looks at my resume. He says, wow, you were director of marketing of a biotech. You worked in advertising. You think you might consider coming to Israel and working here? I said, make me an offer. So I come back to America. The phone rings. He makes me an offer. I said, I'll take it. He says, don't you have to ask your wife? I said, no, I don't have to ask my wife. Most of our kids are here learning anyways. I didn't tell him the rest of it, that I'm sucking money out of the bank. I have, this is a good offer. And, so I came to Israel as I said, I'm -4 as far as ideology. I remember whenever the plane was taxiing into Ben Gurion, everybody around me was saying, hey, I'm going up north. I'm going down south. I'm going here. I'm going to Desert. Where are you going? I said, I'm going to work. This is my bus. So I came to Israel just because it was a job. But thank God, I look back, my wife and I look back and say, wow, what an honor that we got a kick in the pants from God and we love it here and everything. But I didn't come for any ideology. I don't have any right to. I even launched Nefesh B'Nefesh was one of my clients, and I interviewed people, and they were crying and say Jewish stuff. They had no effect on me. I was okay. That's a good soundbite. I'm doing the video. I'm doing the website. I got to get that down. So I have no right to preach. I'm just saying that it's very interesting the way the Midrash, in Dvarim, which is already talking about, the end of times, the way the Midrash categorizes it. So again, another last bucket I'll call is just understanding how God runs the world, understanding the Bechira Chavshit, understanding that we're supposed to learn from adversity. It's a very, very important thing in life to know when you have tough times, and it's very hard. Very few people can do this, but when you're undergoing tough times, to say, I'm supposed to be learning from this. I'm supposed to be growing from this. There's a reason for this. And free choice is very paramount. It's very, again, one of the things I use as a teacher, I said, why is the blood of Cain screaming at God? So the Midrash tells a beautiful story of three friends who go on a picnic and they get in a terrible fight. One ends up killing the other. And the third one comes back and everyone says, why didn't you stop it? You were right there. So God is saying to actually mankind, I was right there. I could have stopped it. I could have stopped Cain from killing Hevel, but I didn't. You know why? Because there's such a thing as free will in this world, and it's a really tough thing, and it caused a lot of grief. But that's the way the world is. You wouldn't want it the other way. You wouldn't want to be Anmatans and Malachim. You want the free will, but it's tough. And God is saying that's why his blood was screaming at me, because he couldn't understand, and didn't understand what free will was all about. Again, the Midrash says, why did the spies go on a doomed mission? It was a doomed mission, so you could tell it was a doomed mission, but again, because they were supposed to learn, and it was a painful lesson, and everybody had free choice, and the Jewish people heard the story, they could have accepted, not accepted. Everybody was being tested on different levels, and whether we as a people were ready to go into the land or not ready, all these things had to come out. It just had to come out. There was a natural process. And so even though it was a doomed mission, that's the way it had to be. I'll end with this. It's also a beautiful thought, talking about Torah, right? So Torah, again, it's so innovative and so creative the way the Midrash handles it. Torah, the Midrash says, is something that comes from your body, which is both a blessing and it betrays you from your own body, right? When you get Torah, what does it mean? Everybody, the whole neighborhood knows that something happened. Maybe you told Lashon Hara or something. But on the other hand, you have a chance to do tshuva for that. What an amazing thing. Imagine if we knew about every sin we did, we could do tshuva. Amazing. So it both betrays us and it's a blessing. And he says, and it talks about other things. The whole thing about, Chava came from Adam, right? Chava was made from Adam. So Chava betrayed Adam, but Chava also was a blessing because Chava gave Adam a chance to take responsibility. When God asked Adam, what happened, he said, it's my wife's fault. That was a terrible thing to say. That's not taking responsibility. So it was a test that was, embedded into the whole story. And then it says beautiful. The Midrash says that look at Moshe. Moshe came from Egypt. Moshe, in a way, betrayed his own country. He was an Egyptian. He grew up in the palace. And he comes back to Paro, and he's causing all these problems. He betrayed his own father. How could that be? But look at it the other way. He gave a chance. Paro could have said, wow, I can't believe it. Your God did this and that. Maybe I should let the people go. In other words, he had a chance because he was his own flesh and blood, because he was from his own home. He knew this guy. So he could have reacted differently. He could have said, I can't argue that God is, running the show and I'm going to have to let the people go. No. So it was a betrayal, but it was also a blessing and a betrayal. So okay, so I've taken up a lot of time, and I wanted to keep time for questions. But again, that was what I formulated in my own mind as what I got out of all these years of working, of learning Midrash. So please, I hope there's some questions, things that we can discuss. I don't want to hog the time here.
Yeah, I'll ask a question.
Okay.
I want to ask a question of clarification. Obviously, you're enthused by Midrash, and you are drawn to it, and probably were drawn to the construct of it even before you start to concentrate in terms of learning, right? And your father is a Jewish studies professor. Is that
Well, my father was a Rav. He got smicha from. I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts. My major influence in my life, which probably has to do with Midrash, was Rav Soloveitchik. I got smicha from him. My father got smicha from him, and the Rav was a very creative person, and he used to teach Chumash with Midrash, and he, I think he probably might have set the seeds, planted the seeds as far as this kind of creative, giving license to this creative approach and not being afraid of irreverent statements from Chazal and what do you do with it? What do you learn from it? But, I would credit him for that. But go ahead. What was your question?
So it's a question of clarification. So you said very initially when you first started, you said the Midrash records. And the word to us record is different than compose or create a parable and so on. So you said record. Okay, so record could still mean that it's a constructed story, but I'm going to ask you to clarify that. Then you said something else when I asked a question about we're talking about dates, and you said that this is something, Midrash is something that is basically a divine work. I mean, you didn't say those words, but and you said that the Talmud also is, and the Mishnah is, in the sense that, as I understand it, having studied a little bit and hoping to study more, is that this is all the Word of God, and it's the extrapolation, it's the trying to understand, it's the Ruach HaKodesh, it's the non-Ruach HaKodesh, and everybody can be involved. So where do you want to place Midrash? Are you saying that God actually went ahead and created these parables and then conveyed it to mankind somehow to be able to, again, cause us to think about it and understand the nuance? How do you understand this? Or is it Midrash in my mind is no different than Gemara. Where does Gemara come from? Gemara is a recording of discussions on the Mishnah, which all this goes back to something that was conveyed to Moshe, not only the written Torah, he was conveyed the oral Torah, all these principles which grew up into the Midrash. So he was conveyed to him these things too, these principles, all these principles of understanding the Midrash. They weren't recorded maybe till 20 CE, but they were all there. They all came from the same source. It's all from God. So to bring us back to the story of Yehuda and Yosef having and I had heard that from someone who was teaching about Nechama Leibowitz, because she brought that this dialogue, and the blood is the blood of the brother that you killed, and so on. You didn't quote that part. So are you suggesting that particular give and take, which is not the Peshat, is something that was formulated in the heavens, and then it was understood by and passed along in a certain tradition, and then the rabbis wrote it out and embellished it to some degree? But that particular parable construct of Judah and of Yehuda and Yosef, are you saying that they said that, or that this parable is something that God created as another way of us being able to get involved in the story? Can you help me?
So I think you're asking a very excellent question, which is very important to discuss. And I'm going to reframe and tell me if I'm reframing it correctly. People often ask, is the Midrash, do you have to take the Midrash literally or not? And the answer is, the Midrash is the absolute truth. But sometimes the absolute truth is not literally the way it happened, but the message is the absolute truth. Right. And so I don't know if that helps you. I'm trying to.
It helps me a little bit, sure. I think that many of us understand that.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of something I was just working on today. Maybe it'll help. Thanks. So the Midrash is talking about in Parsha Noach. There's sort of a theological problem in Parsha Noach. God is destroying mankind, but yet he's putting all these animals on a boat. He's trying to, it almost sounds like Pita. He's so concerned about the animals. What about all these people you're killing? There's an issue going on here. So the Midrash tells the story of Alexander the Great. And it says, and I don't think the story is literal, but it's a very, very telling story. It said Alexander the Great came to a certain country, and when people saw him, they said, "What are you doing here? Is he a friend or foe?" He said, No, I'm just here. I'm interested in how you judge cases. I just want to sit in the background and watch you judge. So the king said, well, I happen to have a case before me today. And what was the case? The case was somebody sold some swampland to someone else, and the other person knew it was swampland. He bought the swampland, and while they were working on it, they discovered gold there in the swampland. And the first person who sold the swampland was arguing, you should keep it. I sold it to you. Tough luck for me. I sold it to you. It's yours. I don't want to hear about anything wrong with the sale. The other person saying, what are you kidding me? You would have sold it to me if you knew it was swampland. I can't in good conscience keep all that gold. It's not fair. So they're each arguing exactly the opposite of what you'd expect, right? Each one to say, to try to invalidate the sale because I don't deserve to get this thing that I didn't know was there. And they're saying, no, you deserve it because that's the way it goes. And what would the king do? The king said to one, by the way, do you have a daughter? He says, yes. And he says, do you have a son? They said, yes. I said, I suggest you get married. The two families get married. Therefore, the wealth will stay in the family. And so Alexander the Great was flabbergasted. And the king said, what's wrong? You didn't like the way I, worked out this case? He says, well, what would you have done? He says, I'll tell you what I would have done. I would have killed them both and taken the gold. And the king was astounded. He said, let me ask you, the country that you come from, do you have any rain? No, he was asking him, do you deserve to get the blessing of rain? You're such a corrupt person. And he says, yeah, we have rain. He says, the king was thinking, I wonder how is it that you deserve? Oh, maybe you have animals. Do you have animals? Because the animals need the rain. Maybe God sends the rain just for the sake of the animals. He says, yes, we do have animals. He says, okay, now I understand. At least I understand how the world works. It's not for your sake that you have rain. It's for your animals. And so basically the Midrash is saying, if you want to know why God is destroying mankind, because they got to the level of animals. And you can't blame animals for being animals. An animal might steal something from someone else if he's hungry, but he's an animal. But when people become animals, so what do you want? What do you make? It's not such a big theological problem here, and Alexander the Great, nothing is not so great. Now, is that story literal? I doubt it. I don't think Alexander the Great.
It's a nice story, and it ties into other parts of history. And
right.
If that typifies Alexander the Great, if it typifies, right.
So I think it's an example of something that you don't have to take literally, but there's truth. It's truth. God is saying, you want to know the truth about mankind, how low they got? I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to use it for someone who the world thinks is great. Why do they call him Alexander the Great? He conquered most of the known world. I mean, that's great, but he wasn't a great person, and morally he wasn't a great person. He was a lowlife. Again, I hope I'm trying to answer your question that sometimes you read things in the Midrash and it seems, wow, this is pshat. This is the truth. I can't understand it without it. It really makes sense. I want to know with the snake and this and that, how is being tested. It seems to feel real of what was going on. On the other hand, there are things you say, okay, that maybe is a little fanciful, but it's truth nevertheless, because the message is true. So I'm splitting that hair. I hope that you can, live with that.
Sure. You study Midrash, and there are obviously different books of Midrash, different compendiums. Right. What do you study from, or multiple?
Right. So at first I was doing only Midrash Tanchuma. Midrash Tanchuma is short enough that you could actually finish a parsha in a week, and so you could write up something about that parsha. When I started Midrash Rabbah means great, I realized how great Rabbah is. As I said, it took me a year to do the first parsha in the Torah, Parsha Bereshis, because Midrash Rabbah is huge, especially Bereshis, especially Parsha Bereshis. But of course, it's very rich, and you can't. And sometimes there are things that overlap, and sometimes there are contradictions, which make it interesting that you can pull in a Midrash from here to help you understand that or not. It's it gets interesting because they're not the same. They take. I've said that, Midrash Tanchuma is more, as I said, finding God's hiding places, and Midrash Rabbah is more of like the psychological background, especially in Parsha Bereshis. It's the psychological background. You want to understand, if they say Cain, for example. Cain, God was the first psychiatrist. If you look at God was trying to give him counseling, to say, don't do it. Don't you see? I'm trying to materialize sin as this thing crouching at your door. Don't do it. Don't do it. Come on, get over it. But he couldn't get over it. He couldn't get over it. It was a crime of passion. He just couldn't do it. And the interesting about what you learn from the Midrash is that God accepted a very half-hearted tshuva. Gadol avonim, and so it's too great for me. I can't take any punishment. And God said, I'll take it. That's your tshuva. I'll take it. I forgive you. What kind of tshuva is that? God knew. According to the Midrash, God knew that it was a crime of passion. He just couldn't bring himself to get to that level where think of how insulting it was. He was the guy who came up with the idea of bringing a korban to God. And his brother comes along and does a korban, and God recognizes that korban and ignores him. Can you imagine how degrading and insulting, and it was like shame. He was full of shame. He couldn't get out of it. So if you learn the Midrash, you see that the emotions going on here. You appreciate. I don't know how you could read the story without understanding the emotions.
This is actually next week's topic. There's Rabbi Yonasan Bender who will be speaking next week on the sin of Cain. And he'll be speaking, he's a psychotherapist, and he'll be speaking about, I forgot the exact title, but narcissism and something else. Wow. Narcissism being very extremely self-centered, obviously, and he's going to bring sources and so on. So anybody else have anything to say? There's a lot more to understand about Midrash, including if you have one or two sentences about why some of the classic commentators, when they do choose to bring in Midrash, what is the motivation? Are they forced to? Excuse me. Do they have an affinity for it, or is it something brought in because you need something to explain away? Do you want to just mention a sentence or two or three?
Well, it's interesting, the famous example of Rashi claimed that he was only dealing with Pshat. And Rashi, of course, is all Midrash, right? That's what Rashi is. Rashi is just bringing you Midrash. I mean, there's not that much that actually Rashi says on his own. If you look carefully at Rashi, he's mostly quoting Midrash. And some of these Midrashes are pretty far out. And so he must have felt that it's not, even though it sounded a little far out, that's the only way you can put your arms around explain what's going on there. So Rashi, is sort of a good advocate for saying that Midrash is Pshat. So,
That's all right. That's something to think about, whether Midrash is Pshat and what Pshat is and so on. And
right.
We'd have to wrestle with that. Thank you, Rabbi Yoni Mozeson.
My pleasure.
Tonight's talk. Tonight was, again, this week's installment of Cup of Torah, a series that was started back in, I believe, early February, maybe late January. I will say early February. And next week, Rabbi Yonasan Bender. This is all for merit for Jackie Batensky, who is Yaakova Ariela Baspruma. And we have taped this evening. We will be putting it up shortly, within a few days, on the Facebook group. Everybody have a great week, and we will see you all very soon.
Thank you very much. Much appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.